Let me tell you the modern, updated tale of North Sentinel Island, an isolated island in the Andaman Islands chain, nominally administered and protected by the Government of India. North Sentinel Island is inhabited, there are humans there, but they are not just a survivor of one of the world's handful of uncontacted indigenous peoples that don't have regular interaction with our global civilization at large, but are even considered mostly uncontacted locally by the inhabitants of the other islands in the chain. One of the 5 other groups of indigenous peoples in the Andamans that are fully in contact are the Onga people. They have been interacting with others for 2 centuries, with an amicable start, though they saw a significant population decline after contact that persists with a very high infant mortality rate to this day, and the problems that come with contact, including poaching, environmental change, and so on. Interestingly, the Onga have a tradition of knowing that when the ground shakes, head to the high ground, as a great wall of water sometimes follows, and they survived the 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake by heading to the hills using this knowledge. The Sentinelese appear to have done this as well. They knew what to do. I'd love to know how old that knowledge is, as these people have been in the Andaman Islands since prehistory, at least 30 to 50,000 years, but split presumably thousands of years ago. The Onga were aware of North Sentinel Island and even had a traditional name for it, so they knew about it for a very long time, but apparently without contact, potentially for the same reasons that the Sentinelese are mostly uncontacted today. In the 19th century, the British brought members of the Onga to North Sentinel Island to see if communication was possible. It was not. The Onga could not understand the Sentinelese, suggesting a very long time of isolation. Yet there does seem to be evidence of cultural similarities between the 2 groups. Body decoration and techniques on how they cook food are similar, along with similar traditional canoe design. There are also similarities with other Andaman groups, such as the Jarawas, in that their bows bear similar markings, whereas the Onga do not. This strongly suggests that contact in the past was there, but hasn't been there for a very, very long time, enough for significant language drift between the Sentinelese and all other groups in the Andamans. This may simply be because the North Sentinelese are generally hostile and very protective of their island as they are today. Perhaps local interactions amongst the islands was problematic and rare before the British ever became involved in the area. And to this day, a number of contacted groups in the Andamans seem to prefer some degree of privacy and isolation as part of their culture. The first known incidence of a Western sighting of North Sentinel Island was in 1771. The surveyor John Ritchie observed lights on the shore of the island from the British East India Company hydrographic survey vessel, the Diligent. Ships of this nature may well have passed the island in the past, but it's not recorded. But what's interesting here is to wonder what the people in North Sentinel Island thought of this passing ship. This was not a canoe they would have been familiar with, but this giant floating platform or vessel with white sails passing by of a type that they might have been completely unfamiliar with. They might not have seen anyone on the deck in what seemed to be the dark, just lights and a silhouette. To them, they might have thought of it as a UFO, but in this case, an unidentified floating object. It's fun to play with scenarios here. Since the British ship saw the fires of the Sentinelese, it's a good bet the Sentinelese saw the ship's lights in turn. Maybe it spawned folktales that they tell to this day. But what of other scenarios? Maybe no one noticed, and they were on the other side of the island at the time, with various security fires going to keep the embers going as they seem to not be able to create fire, just keep it going. Or maybe one single poor Sentinelese person saw the lights of the mysterious ship, told the others and no one believed them. Or they did tell the local government and the tribal elders swore them to secrecy and told them to get back to cooking their shellfish and that they saw nothing. Any interaction in the subsequent decades either didn't happen or is unrecorded, but in 1867 the Indian merchant ship Nineveh crashed on a reef near the island. The 106 survivors had no choice but to head to the beach. Everything was quiet for the first 2 days, but on the third, a group of red-painted warriors appeared and started firing arrows that were apparently iron-tipped. The survivors were able to repel the attackers with sticks and stones until a British Royal Navy party rescued them. While shipwrecks do not go away immediately, and no doubt materials from the wrecks started washing up on shore, as probably happened in the past, hence the availability of iron, albeit to the Sentinelese of uncertain, perhaps ghostly or sacred origin. From that point on, shipwrecks have occasionally happened at North Sentinel Island and continue to do so. Right now, anthropologists know that the Sentinelese can cold work metal as a result of these wrecks. They can make tools and arrow points from the metal they're finding on their shores, though they probably didn't find it as much until recently. It could be that copper hull spike from a wooden vessel wrecked on the island in, say, 1650 might have been precious, even secret. This unknown material that did very strange things like change shape when hammered on, and show a shiny appearance when scratched. But today, this is old hat to them. They have tons of shipwreck metal, with the odd potential that the North Sentinelese have metallic aluminum working abilities, despite being essentially a Stone Age culture, working of a metal that wasn't isolated as such in the technological world until 1824. They would have no idea that they would be working with a highly advanced technologically derived metal that for the vast majority of human history no one had other than its ores. You can play with other, even later metals that might be found on modern shipwrecks, titanium, which does not behave much like aluminum, or even gold or silver coins from decades ago, or even really mundane but perhaps mystifying materials such as plastics. What use can a hunter-gatherer culture find for a discarded piece of glass? Glass is sharp and useful, if not problematic if you're walking barefoot on the beach. I think it would be really interesting to put on a cloaking device and walk among the Sentinelese people and see what they do with our flotsam and trash, of which they have no conception of its actual intended use. Or maybe they do. They may understand the purpose of the boat that wrecked, it's a big canoe, but not so much the unopened 12-pack of Pepsi that crashed with it. But they may well understand that the bottles are good for holding water. Maybe they use them for that. Maybe they even tried the Pepsi they contained. But there's also a good reason for isolation for the Sentinelese. They actually have had limited contact with the world at large. In 1880, a Royal Navy officer was sent to try to establish contact with the Sentinelese, which by that time the island was nominally part of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands British colony. They did so in apparent force, as the Sentinelese scattered into the forest upon landing. The party found nothing but abandoned villages for days until they eventually found an elderly man and woman and 4 children. They were promptly kidnapped and brought back to Port Blair, the administrative center of the island groups. This did not go well. The man and woman rapidly became ill and died, and the children, who were also falling ill, were hurriedly returned to the island to unknown ends along with gifts. What the Sentinelese thought of this is unknown, but it's hard to see how they wouldn't have found the whole thing hostile. Abductions were 4 are returned ill and worse off than they were when they left, and 2 never returned at all. By 1896, things had become openly hostile. An escaped convict landed on the island in a makeshift raft, and was found dead on the beach with arrow piercings and a cut throat. Likewise, several years later, the chief commissioner of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands landed looking for other fugitives. They saw no native islanders, but found that the fugitives had all been killed. The commissioner also reported that a Sentinelese individual apparently drifted off course and ended up with the Onga and actually lived with them for at least 2 years. So this purported Sentinelese man returned with a British landing party to the island. But the Sentinelese didn't recognize him and opened fire with the arrows. The claimed Sentinelese man refused to stay on the island, so may have never been from there in the first place, casting doubt on his story. Subsequent visits by outsiders have either resulted in the Sentinelese retreating into the forest or going on the attack, though in recent years there has been some limited amicable contact between fishermen and the Sentinelese, but only on the open ocean. Meeting on the ocean seems acceptable, just do not set foot on their island. This is bolstered by a 1974 affair when a National Geographic film crew landed on the island with a team of anthropologists. They tried the gift-giving angle to try to establish contact, but it went horribly wrong. Being a film crew, they showed up with motorboats and cameras, and all that comes with that, and it immediately provoked a violent response from the Sentinelese. They left such gifts as a plastic toy car, cookware, a live pig, some coconuts, and a toy doll. This resulted in the director getting shot in the leg with an arrow, as the Sentinelese warrior that shot it withdrew, laughing boisterously. The Sentinelese kept the cookware and the coconuts, shot and buried the pig and the doll, apparently finding no value there, with no information on what happened to the plastic car. National Geographic did manage to get the first photograph of some of the Sentinelese people, but with very little other success. Since this, the Sentinelese either wave at people nearby, retreat into the forest, moon, yes, I said they moon interlopers, or attack anyone that lands on the island. And it's a good bet that the reason for this is, and this is backed up by recently contacted tribes in the Amazon, that they know and learn more about us than we do about them. In the case of a recently contacted tribe in the Amazon, they knew full well that there were many different groups of us, such as violent poachers, normal villagers, and even the Peruvian army. But the sad thing is, only by luck are the Sentinelese still there. Had their island been in the wrong location during World War II, an event they probably had little indication of it going on and gripping the world as it did, they might have been invaded. By responding in a hostile manner, they may have easily been wiped out through shelling, again something they may not be aware is possible, and their island bulldozed and turned into an airfield. They don't know any of this, and today are protected people by the Indian government, but human civilization could still wipe them out with little trouble in a bad situation. After all, there are only between 50 and 200 people living on the island. Because of this, the question must be asked. Is this a zoo hypothesis phenomenon? Are the Sentinelese surrounded by a vastly technologically superior but changing civilization that they only occasionally glimpse and have no deep understanding of? Yes. Are they subject to a foreign power without knowing it? Yes. North Sentinel Island is claimed by India. Are they in a zoo? Yes. If they send a raiding party to a neighboring island, then what happens? They don't do it, but they'd get shot, abducted, or returned to their island by force. Is their island under surveillance? Yes, helicopters fly over with anthropologists trying to take a census of their numbers. If the Sentinelese knew why those flights happen and the reason, wouldn't they ask why? Why do they need to know our numbers? If we restricted all access to the island and we, at least to Sentinelese eyes, suddenly disappeared, perhaps for centuries other than our flotsam washing up, would they wonder if we were still here or had our world ended? So I have to ask, in their position, have the Sentinelese formed a zoo hypothesis of their own? Thanks for listening. I'm futurist and science fiction author John Michael Godier, currently running through a scenario. So what of the Pepsi? So the Sentinelese find the 12-pack, think it's delicious, and break their silence asking us for the recipe. So we give it to them, and then they promptly ask us to leave the island because they consider our presence a national security risk, and that the island is classified. Island 51, you understand. Don't call us, we'll call you. See you in a few centuries, and be sure to check out my books at your favorite online book retailer and subscribe to my channels for regular, in-depth explorations into the interesting, weird, and unknown aspects of this amazing universe in which we live.